Am I on? I'm on. Cristo è risorto. Christos ha resucitado. Christ is risen. It's a great joy for me to be here with you today. There's a humorous story told about a man who was shipwrecked on a desert island. And he was there all by himself for about 25 years. And then a few years later, he was rescued. And when they went to the island, he had built 2 churches. In those 25 years, he had built 2 churches. And the people who rescued him said, "Why do you have 2 churches?" And he said, "This is the church I go to, and this is the church I don't go to." For too long, we have thought preaching the gospel was bringing people to our church. We must understand that in order for evangelization to be truly authentic, it is about one person, and that person is Jesus Christ. He is the gospel from the Alpha to the Omega, the beginning and the end. Jesus Christ is the good news. Not our denomination, not even our theology, but Jesus Christ Himself and who He is. If we are to evangelize the world, then that must be our message. Our message must be the same as what St. Peter preached on the day of Pentecost, when he stood up and he says, "This Jesus whom you crucified, God has made Him both Lord and Christ." The gospel is not about Muhammad. The gospel is not about Buddha. The gospel is not about the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Patriarch of Constantinople, or the Pope of Rome. The gospel is about Jesus Christ. It is the Evangelion, the good news. And what is the good news? What's so good about the good news? Well, the bad news, we first of all have to think about the bad news. The bad news is we're going to hell. That's the bad news. The bad news is that we are estranged from God. There's a terrible gulf fixed between us and God. And Jesus comes and takes on our humanity. In every way, He becomes for us the human man, the Son of Man. He comes as the Son of Man and the Son of God in order, as St. Athanasius the Great said, God became man so that man may become God. St. Maximus the Confessor says, we become by grace. Everything God is by nature because of the man Jesus Christ. Because in a holy baptism by faith and repentance, our humanity is joined to His humanity. His humanity is joined to the divinity. And therefore, as St. Peter says, we become partakers of the divine nature. That's good news. Do you hear anybody singing about that on MTV? Do you hear anybody talking about that on the television? That is the message that we as Christians together must proclaim. This is the good news that the world needs to hear. Then when they come to embrace this good news, then we can start talking about all that other stuff. But first of all, they must be introduced to the living Christ. Because as Bishop Graham in his talk said, the gospel is about transformation. The good news is about transformation. When Christ comes and dwells in our hearts, we are transformed. We are transfigured. We are changed. We are delivered. We become a new creation. And as we together, as that new creation, live together and express that throughout the world, then culture begins to be transformed. When Christian people are transformed and they begin to paint, it's in their painting. When a Christian person is transformed and he begins to sing and begins to write, it comes through his writing. And therefore culture is transformed because the people who make the culture are transformed. This is Christian culture. And so therefore evangelization, the spreading of the good news, therefore will change the nations. But we can only do it if we preach the good news. Because the Apostle Paul says there are many gospels. There are many gospels. He wrote to the Galatians and he said to them, even if an angel comes to you, if any other man comes to you, if any angel even comes to you and preaches to you some other gospel, let him be accursed. But the gospel that the Apostle Paul proclaimed is the gospel we must proclaim. And when we proclaim that gospel together, Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, Evangelicals, Pentecostals, Charismatics, when we proclaim that same gospel, then the world is not going to be confused. There is no such thing as a Roman Catholic gospel. There is no such thing as an Orthodox gospel. There is no such thing as a Protestant gospel. It's the gospel. And when the bishops and the pastors and the priests begin to proclaim that same word, that same message, then the world will not be confused. They're saying the same thing. They're proclaiming the same good news. They're proclaiming the same message. So wherever I go, I know I will hear that same good news. But the problem is that we've confused the world. We have become Babel. We have returned Babel because of our divisions. We've returned Babel. No one hears us speaking with one voice. But if we again return that one voice to the church, that one proclamation, then the world will hear the one voice. And when they hear the one voice, they will say, Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.